This is A Lost Plot, the podcast where we explore meaning in movies together. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to, you guessed it, another episode of A Lost Plot. I am your host, Maverick, and today we have two wonderful guests joining us today to give some potentially controversial opinions on a newer release in the Star Wars universe. That's right, Disney has taken over and they have come back with Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens. And today we have our very own classic Andrew coming out to join us to rediscuss another Star Wars movie. Andrew.
Hi.
Yes. And today we have joining us a counter opinion, Sean.
Hello.
So today, as I just briefly mentioned, we are reviewing Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens. What are the details about this movie, Sean?
Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens is a 2015 American epic space opera film, a continuation of the beloved 6 episodes that were shot all around the world in the last century. Written by Lawrence Kasdan, J.J. Abrams, and Michael Arndt. It is also directed by J.J. Abrams as well. And as you'll see throughout this series, who directs the movie is going to be very important. Leading in the roles is starring Daisy Ridley as Rey, the main character, Adam Driver as the penultimate villain, Kylo Ren, Oscar Isaac as Poe Dameron, and John Boyega as Finn.
Nice. And Andrew, you want to tell everyone just briefly what this movie is about?
Well, I'm going to give 2 descriptions because I like the first one better, but I'm sure Maverick's going to want one more that's more specific. 7, if you listen to the podcast of 4, is just a worse iteration of 4.
You weren't even on that podcast.
Well, it doesn't matter. If you listen to it, it's just a worse iteration of it.
Yeah.
7 essentially takes place 20 years after Episode 6. The Empire has all but collapsed. The Jedi Order was attempted to be rebuilt, but much like many things when it comes to rebuilding in the Star Wars universe, it doesn't last very long. You find the characters of Kylo Ren, who is the grandson of Darth Vader, Rey, who's a scavenger, Poe Dameron, a resistance pilot, and Finn, a reluctant stormtrooper. They all kind of get their paths crossed on the planet of Jakku around a droid who has special information about a planet-destroying device. And the movie kind of transpires, I'm forgetting the word right now, progresses. There we go. That's the word I was looking for. Thank you. Progresses from there. You have classic space battles, you have a planetary assault, you have general Star Wars stuff. I don't know what else to make of it. Rey gets captured, and then she gets released of her own doing. And then there's a massive battle at the end, much like the Battle of Yavin. It's quite literally just Episode 4 repackaged.
Okay. Well, there is some opinion already. We love it. Now, on the 9-point rating system that we use to rate movies in this podcast, Andrew, what did you get?
See, I want to put mine last.
I know you do, but I'm putting mine last, so you get to go first.
Okay, can Sean go first then? Sean's the new one.
Sure, why not? I took the quiz according to Maverick's 9-point scale website, and according to the results, I got a 5.65 out of 9.
Wow, okay. Andrew, what'd you get?
3.2.
Okay. I got a 6.55.
Holy crap! What the flip?
So I'm very excited for this review. So let's
Wait,
get
what
started.
did you get, Sean?
5.65.
What?
I know. I knew you would be so
How
excited.
the mighty have fallen.
Oh, we'll see. And maybe
This
you
is
can
some
convince
John
me.
Wick level crap.
Oh, okay. All right, big guy. You're banned. No, I'm just kidding. So,
All right, let's go. Come
the
on.
opener. Did the opener catch your attention? And neither of you can answer this. Did the opener catch your attention, make you want to keep watching? I'm going to kick it off to Sean first because I want to hear what he has to say more than you, Andrew.
As a little bit of background, the way I approach this movie is the way that probably most people did, which was they've only ever seen the first 6 movies. And the last time they saw the first 6 movies was years ago, probably when it was rerunning on television. So when it comes to my perspective on the movie, I'm not someone who had the absolute perfect memory of what the first 6 episodes were. I'm approaching it like a moviegoer would. And I think the opener does a lot of very good elements to capture the attention. It does the classic scroll, which is always nice, presents some continuity. It has a very menacing opening scene with showing off Kylo Ren and trying to make him a villain that exudes terror, right? Like the famous scene that everybody knows about where he uses the Force to stop the laser bolts and massacring villagers, right? Just the brutality of what the First Order represents is definitely something like, oh, this is like an immediately terrifying, conquering Force threat. And I think all those preserve a really good element of mystique, makes me want to learn more. The opening title scroll, I have a bunch of notes that I wrote during the movie. The opening title scroll asks me some big questions that I'm hoping to get answered throughout the movie, and most of them do get answered. So I think it's very effective at setting up, here's the things you need to go about, and I'm constantly looking for those throughout the movie. So I think it did a good job.
Nice. That's a pretty good summary. Andrew, you thought it did pretty well in the opener too, huh?
I actually did like the opener. I think
Okay,
for
nice.
all the elements of the movie, I actually do enjoy the opener. Like, in terms of what an opener is meant to do, it is supposed to set the scene, it's supposed to catch my attention, and it's supposed to give me expectations for what the movie is meant to be like. And I think it fulfills all 3 of those goals, because in terms of setting up expectations, like Sean says, the scroll, you get most of those questions answered. You also have pretty much you're establishing in a much smaller scale the role that the Resistance as well as the First Order plays. You do a good job of setting up who Kylo Ren's character is, specifically within this scene. We're talking this scene and what I like about the characters in this scene, not the rest of the movie.
Yeah, and this is just setting everything up. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I actually really like how they set up Kylo Ren's character. Like, you have a Darth Vader-esque character, which for a movie that's kind of just a repackaging of 4, I think they did a good job of doing at least a little bit of variation here.
Mm-hmm.
I think the way that Kylo Ren it looks like he's going is more of the menacing, you don't know who this is. Although, never mind that. I'll say that comment for later.
Yeah. I know where you're going. Go ahead. Just.
And so, with Poe Dameron's character too, you have he's. I'm gonna be honest. He's a cooler version of Princess Leia, but I think they do a good job of setting up him too as being a more. He's because and I do appreciate this about 7. They kind of go for the same trio that Star Wars normally goes for, but they kind of mix and match the bits and pieces of each of the characters. Because with Luke, you have, say there's 2 elements to each one. You have Luke, you have farm boy, Jedi. Han Solo, you have smuggler and scoundrel. Princess Leia, you have princess and rebel, or rebel leader. And so when it comes to these 3, Rey is kind of just, she's basically just in a reiteration of
Luke.
What Luke was. But Poe is a different main character. He's a pilot and he's a rebel leader, but he's not a Jedi. And so he has some elements of Luke, some elements of Han, and some elements of Leia, and they're repackaged into this resistance fighter. And you also have humor to go with it, to where the point is it's not overdone, but it's kind of this cocky attitude without being an absolute piece of work.
Yeah.
You have the scene where he's sitting there staring awkwardly at Kylo Ren. He's like, who's going to talk first? Me talk first? You talk first?
Exactly.
I think also Kylo Ren holding the bolt, it kind of exudes the power that you're trying to go for with Kylo Ren. So yeah, in terms of the opener, I think they did a pretty good job of kind of setting that up. Also setting up that Kylo Ren is willing to just kill people point blank. So, I mean, yeah. Okay. In terms of as the movie goes, I actually like the opener.
Yeah. No, and honestly, you guys pointed out all the things I was going to point out. So I thought this not. The only thing I will say is not only do I think that this is a great opener, I actually think this is one of the better openers in all of the Star Wars movies. I think it's better than the opener for episode 1. I think it's better than the episode opener for episode 2. I think it's a little better than the opener for episode 6 and arguably as good as the opener for episode 5. Like, I think that it's a pretty solid beginning to the story, and like especially for people who are being reintroduced to this universe after years and years of it being, dead to some degree. It's exciting to see it really bring back the nostalgia of the Star Wars universe in a way that's very powerful and palpable, and brings back, reminiscence of episode 4, but at the same time, has its own feel, like you guys said, with Kylo Ren, with some of these other characters. So it's pretty good. Anyways, let's move on to the main characters.
The main character does have a clear and obvious gap in their life, which is that Rey is constantly feeling some sort of anxiety that she has to get back to her home planet. Yeah, she's obviously wanting to go do more with how much she constantly jumps on the chance for adventure. I think it's not really well explained during this first movie what her longing or yearning is for, though. So it makes me just yeah, she kind of has a missing gap, but we have no freaking clue what that gap is in the entirety of the first movie.
Right. Other than just a generic desire, you get some sense that there was abandonment as a child, and that gets more clear as the story goes on, but you're not clear why or how that occurred. And so definitely her arc, at the very least, and what is wrong in her life is not fulfilled in this story at all. But they definitely give some clear indications that there is a problem with how she was raised and what she's trying to get back to. But yeah, it's also not clear why she wants that.
Oh, are we going to go character by character, or just
the main character? The side characters we kind of bump into whichever ones we feel appropriate, but the main character is pretty significant. Unless you think there's multiple main characters in this story.
See, that's the question. I think it's pretty obvious that they're going for Rey, but at the same time, they spend a lot of screen time on Poe and Finn as well, which is where it's kind of it's a Star Wars movie, and they kind of have this whole trio thing going as far as main characters. So I think Poe and Finn kind of function as this weird, they function in this weird ethereal plane between side character and main character, where it's they have elements of both. I mean, they're totally going for this whole redemption arc with Finn, and they could be doing something with Poe, but they're not. And so, I think it's important to mention them and talk about them, but I think it is,
right.
At least in 7, it's pretty obvious that Rey is meant to be the main character, much like Luke is meant to be in 4, 5, and 6, and yet Han and Leia still play a very significant role in that story.
Sure.
And so, I think in terms of Rey, one, why she cares so much about being at home or being on Jakku. And Sean kind of touches on this when he talks about the abandonment issues. And I guess they kind of go for this when they bring in Han Solo, and they show how attached she gets so quickly. But I think secondly, and maybe this is going too far ahead, but I think one of the problems I have with Rey's character is that her motivation just disappears out of nowhere. Because half of the movie, she's I need to get back to Jakku. I need to get back to Jakku. I need to get back to Jakku. And then all of a sudden, she just shuts up about it, and it never comes up again. And then she just is I'm going to go find Luke Skywalker.
And you're specifically talking about that scene at Takodana with Maz. After that, is that what you're talking about? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. She has this resistance to all of this, and then it's just gone completely. Never comes up again. And it just, in terms of character development, it doesn't make any sense, because you've been spending all this time building up this character who's reluctant, and you have great examples of characters who are reluctant, because they're going for this whole she's reluctant to accept her destiny to be this Jedi, and you have great instances of characters who are reluctant to accept their destiny, but destiny, bro, I feel like George McFly, density. I don't think you guys got that joke. But like Aragorn, he's a character who's running away from the path that's been like laid out for him. But there's always a pivotal moment that changes that course. For Rey, there's no moment, and if there is, it's off screen. And so to the viewer, it's just like, what? Like, why do you not care?
Right. And to kind of play the devil's advocate, but I definitely see where you're going with this. You have that scene where she has that inflection point on Takodana where she runs away from the bar and she's, I guess, contemplating her path forward as she has come to this realization that she has a affinity for the Force, right? And I think in that moment, that's where they're trying to get toward that idea that you were just speaking about, that this is where she has this pivotal change and doesn't necessarily fully embrace it at that time. I would argue that that happens later in the story, but at the very least is trying to have that that inner struggle resolved, if that makes sense.
I think I'm going to push back slightly against Andrew when it comes to like, it's this like switch that comes out of nowhere. Like in the context of the movie, Rey is someone who like has heard of the Force but has never encountered the Force. And then all of a sudden she experiences freaky space wizard magic by touching an object that she was experiencing like voices calling her to. Experiences a massive vision, which is unlike anything she's ever experienced before. And it's not just she's learning the affinity with the Force. It's like her conception of the galaxy has expanded. And that doesn't just mean her destiny. It means just like physically her ability to comprehend like what is at stake if the First Order takes over.
Right.
And then like immediately afterwards, the universe does not give her a chance to go back to her planet. And so like the message Rey is getting after getting attacked is, I can't even go back to my planet until I resolve this First Order nonsense. Because otherwise the First Order is just going to keep coming after me.
Right. Well, and to a certain degree too, there is, I think, some, and maybe this is me reading into it, so I could be wrong here, but one, it's not like she has an affinity for the planet as much as she has an affinity for the family that abandoned her there, right? And there's some sort of at least indicated link within that prophetic vision that there is a link between what's going on with the First Order and the Resistance and what happened to her as a child. And that, I think, is where you have more of this contemplation on her part that is the destiny forward to find what she's missing, which is her family, is that tied to the conflict that's going on a broader scale in the universe.
I think the thing is like, as a viewer, and I think this, like, you're watching a movie, right? And you spend time setting up this character. And you're not like, you're kind of like, Rey's here, right? Why is Rey here? Rey is here because she has decided she wants to help this droid, which I'll get to that later. I have comments on that. But the entire time there's still this pushback as to why, like, she can't continue to be here. And so, like, you guys are going for
you mean here being Jakku, or here being with the Resistance, or what do you mean by
with the Resistance? With the Resistance, like with Han Solo, with the Resistance helping them out.
Okay,
I get what you guys are going for. The problem I'm having is you're having to read too much into what's going on in Rey's life. And as the person producing the movie, you don't want to just tell the audience what's happening, but you definitely need to be showing what's happening through dialogue, through interactions with characters, through different shots. And with Rey, the last time we see her interacting with the Force before like all the culmination happens, she gets captured by Kylo and all this, is she touches the lightsaber, freaks out, and says, "No, I want nothing to do with this. Leave me alone. Never want to touch that thing again." She literally tells
Maz.
Maz. She tells her, "I don't ever want to pick that up again. I don't ever want to touch it again."
Right.
And so when I say it's a jump out of nowhere, it is a 180 flip, quite literally, from I never want to touch a lightsaber, never want to use the Force again, to the next time we see Rey, like, actually making choices in terms of like how to move forward is when she's in a cell and she's like talking to Kylo Ren, and then she starts using the Force out the wazoo and escapes from this massive planet, Death Star.
No, I think that like that whole thing with the Force is a whole maybe, and maybe that is a relevant discussion to have at this point, just because it is the main character and their the essence of their powers. Um, so my big issue with Rey isn't so much the problems and how she's developed initially. My bigger problem is that her arc as a whole in the story just simply isn't complete. This story of Rey's arc is pointless encompassed in this movie alone. And so I see this as starting off the new trilogy, right? The sequel trilogy. And in regards to Rey's arc, they started off well, but it doesn't have a capped end at the end of episode 7. And that's a problem I have in regards to character growth, which is later in this review, which is why it got points here for me, but doesn't get points later. Because while they start her off well, she doesn't have a way to she doesn't develop necessarily into something clearly, other than she's joined a side, but it's not even clear why she's joined that side. And so
Yeah,
maybe that's
exactly.
where I get off the train in regards to this one, is that arc just isn't completed, and that's what they set up 8 to hopefully achieve.
Yeah, I think going off what you said, and I'm not like trying to cut Sean off. I just this like what I want to say like has directly to do with what you were talking about in terms of like why she joins the Resistance. And this is another complaint I have about Rey, is she's very obviously supposed to be a Luke Skywalker-esque character, right?
Of course.
When you think about Luke Skywalker is introduced as a restless farm boy. He is stuck in a life he does not want. He wants to be off the planet. He wants to join the rebellion. He talks about it in the beginning of episode 4. And so when he's given the opportunity, it makes total sense for him to join. Like it's just the obvious decision for him to make. With Rey, she is given the like her whole character exudes, I don't want to leave. I am content with where I am. I am waiting for the family that left me behind. And so as soon as she finds out that Finn's with the Resistance, she like becomes ecstatic. And then she just like takes the ship off world. And then she's like, oh, the Resistance is obviously great. I love the Resistance. I'm going to help the Resistance fight the First Order. And I mean, I guess you could make the argument that like, yeah, the First Order was trying to kill her. So obviously she's not going to side with them. Yeah, Sean over here freaking out. But the point, the problem is that why does she stay with them? It's not necessarily why does she join them initially, because that the argument that they're trying to kill her is pretty obvious. But if Rey just like didn't help them in the final fight after like Kylo Ren like attacks her and then all this stuff, why does she continue? Why does she pursue this path of learning the Force with Luke? Why is she the one that goes to find Luke?
Well, okay, that's a different question that I could take issue with, but
okay.
Yes.
Well, my point is why does she stick around? Like the initial joining up makes some sense, but they don't give her motivations in the movie. It's just like she does it. And like the best motivation you might get is, oh, it's the right thing to do.
I think you can go back to Sean's point on this one a bit and say that it's the vision that she has that helps to at least compel her toward that side. But I would generally agree with you that, yeah, there's not like a clear motivation per se why she should be joining the Resistance, other than she has a what's the word I'm looking for? It's almost like the Resistance is a idealistic world that she dreams of in her outer rim planet, and when it appears, she's like, oh, that's super cool. It's like seeing some sort of celebrity group that appears on your planet, and she's excited to see them, but she's not necessarily clear that she wants to join them. There's a difference there. And so I don't know, but Sean, I'm sure you have a few things to say on that.
I mean, I'm just gonna leap off you and say the same thing, which is like her initial admiration for the Resistance is clearly one of like legends, right? Like she's going, oh, I've heard all these stories, and oh, you're the Han Solo, and so like she doesn't want to join the resistance so much as she wants to admire it and encounter it because it's just so fascinating to her. And then like throughout the movie, I think what it seems like for you, Andrew, isn't like as soon as like they get off the Starkiller base, why is it she goes to Luke? That's your big question mark from what you're telling me. And I think the context of being on Starkiller base is the reason, which is it's not just the vision. It's also the fact that she demonstrated she can do the Force, right? When she mind controls the guard, when she uses the Force to use the lightsaber and wins the lightsaber fight. And once you realize you are a space wizard, you're probably going to want to learn how to use your space wizard powers. And I think it is reasonable for her to go, if there's only one Jedi in the entire galaxy, because that's the way they describe Luke in the opening title crawl, The Last Jedi, then if she wants to become a Jedi, there is only one person in the entire universe who can help her with that, and that's Luke.
I don't think that her seeing Luke, especially at the end, and we can get to this more when we get to that point, it is necessarily the worst thing. I think that there's bigger questions about why she's the one that sees him, though. Anyways, I think the point I want to make overall, Andrew, which I reflected on when I rewatched this, was this movie isn't actually that bad. It sets off a series again in a strong way. It harkens back to the old movies in a lot of good ways. It doesn't really lack a ton in regards to content-wise. I think that it has a lot of good things going for it. I think the bigger problem is that it reflects on 8 and 9 for the trilogy as a whole, and those ones reflect very poorly on 7 and make 7 get a bad rap, when I don't think that 7 in and of itself is necessarily a bad movie.
I hear what you're saying, Maverick. And I'm inclined to agree with you in terms of like 7, 8, and 9. Like 7 isn't a horrible movie. I'll be honest, I was actually surprised it was a 3.2 when I gave it the rating. And I'm like looking through the points that I gave it.
You gave it a lot of zeros, like, that's for sure.
Well, like there's specific questions you asked where it was like, I don't really have, like when I think about whether or not that exists within the movie, like I personally am not finding one there. And so like, was like your question about was the main character compellingly flawed? No, like Rey's character in my mind is not a flawed character.
Well, it's not just flawed, right? So, and that's where it says, I just summarize it in the email so that it's easier for people to find where it's at. But in the full question on the 9-point system, it's flawed or has something lacking from their life that they need, almost like a hole to fill. And that's where she definitely hits that, in my opinion, because she clearly has this deep longing for a place in the galaxy. And she thinks she'll find that in her family, which has abandoned her. But she doesn't actually know. And so that's a big question of this movie.
So in terms of her wanting her family, it makes sense. And like the setup for the movie, sure. But like as soon as she stops caring about going to Jakku, where does that void go? Like there's no clear indication that it has moved to her family is now the Resistance, which is what it probably should be. There's a little bit of like, oh, Han Solo is that. There's like, and like Ben, like Kylo Ren kind of makes the like a mockery of it, if you will, like saying, oh, this like father you never had is kind of gone now after he kills him. But at the same time, it's like, if this is a thing that has been bothering her so much so that she makes a mark on her wall every single day, and she like is insistent that she will stay and wait for this family, there needed to be some sort of scene or dialogue that indicated like this is the family that she has been looking for, or this is good enough for her. Like why would she keep looking when it's right there in front of her? Whereas it's kind of like for a main character, if they're going for the Resistance as being her family, then they needed to spend more time on it rather than just kind of like assuming that the audience picks up on it.
No, and I'd agree with that.
It's like that's an example of where I would have given her like low points.
Sure, but I personally would put that later in the review, not in the initial part about, because clearly this long is very strong for him. But we could argue circles around this specific point for hours.
Yeah,
Clearly.
yeah.
I'm sure you loved the setting, so I wanted to get on with that. Did you like how they created this universe in regards to, especially the previous sections of the universe? You think it's just as compelling as the rest of Star Wars episodes 1 through 6?
When you say compelling, what do you mean?
Well, just like, is it the same universe? Like, do we see the same universe with rules that make sense in this universe?
Yeah, it mostly more, at least in the initial opener. It's got stormtroopers and laser blasters and ships. It's got a mechanical, grungy feel. It's not like a hyper digital universe that's plugged into the internet. It doesn't have like an AI revolt or a Butlerian jihad, right? Definitely
Nice.
tries to maintain its identity, right? We've got multicultural seedy bars where a bunch of aliens exist. There's mercenaries and outlaws. So I think it mostly maintains the consistency of the last universe from the opening.
See, with this question, Maverick, it's you have it placed in the opener. Like Sean even references like later parts in the movie. And so I think when you're asking about the setting, it's important to note like the beginning setting is important, but also the rest of the movie and how they set up the universe and like call back to the way that the universe has been established is important as well. And so for the opener, I think the setting's great. I think that the way that they like establish the stormtroopers, like they're a different variation, but it's very obvious they're stormtroopers. You have the desert planet, you have the droid, you have all kinds of things that are kind of like well established as like this is what Star Wars is. I mean, you even have the opening scroll.
The setting question, to probably be fair, should be later in the review. It's supposed to encompass the entire movie. I just put it there for the sake of maybe convenience, especially because I think the setting question is a little bit detached from the flow of the movie in general, but it needs to be part of the review system because if the setting and the rules of the universe are violated, that can take you out of the story. So it needs to be in the review somewhere. I just happened to put it at the beginning, but it should encompass the entire story arc.
Yeah,
for your purposes.
I think in terms of the settings and the rules of the universe, for the most part, they follow it pretty well. Like you just there's not really anything too universe breaking in 7, which is one of the reasons I appreciate it over 8 and 9. But when there are like 2 specific instances I can think of where it's kind of one of them is definitely like, okay, that's a bit much, and the other one's kind of like, okay, I can kind of like accept that. We'll start with the smaller one first. The first one, and me and Sean and someone else had this conversation and talking about like how hyperdrives work in the Star Wars universe. Okay. And it's very much established in the first 6 movies that the way hyperdrive works is that you have to 1, plot a course, and then 2, the way it works is it like detects gravity wells. So like if you have a planet that functions as a gravity well, the plot you're coursing,
the court you're plotting.
Plot a course. Words.
Would you say he lost the plot?
Nice.
The direction you're going, all right? The route you're taking, it avoids gravity wells. So much so that if you were to enter a gravity well or come near one, the ship would stop. And that's to prevent you to going through like a star and blowing up. But in 7, Han Solo enters a planet while in light speed, which doesn't make any sense because it's a gravity well. And so like, again, it's minor because you could argue that you turned it off, right? We came to this conclusion in our discussion.
I literally
but they
wrote
never
this
said
down.
they turned it off.
Ironically enough.
But they never said they turned it off though. Which is one of the problems I have.
So dude, okay, like you're not going to have every single detail explained in a movie. This was one of those things that I was like, okay, this is a little suspicious, but honestly, like there's some simple explanations from the basic point of even Han Solo is an expert flyer, right? He's known for his flying skills. And so you go, give him the benefit of a doubt, which I generally say if you can give a movie the benefit of a doubt, do, because the idea is that you don't fill in every gap. You tell the story and then the audience fills in the gaps in their own mind. And that's what they're supposed to do as a good storyteller. And so I think that one, ignore that. Andrew's wrong.
Okay, first of all, I'm not wrong. You yourself wrote it down. Second of all, I literally said
I wrote it down as not a
it in this.
problem because I knew you would bring it up.
Okay, buddy. I said it was a minor thing. Secondly, that's why I started with it. The major problem I have in terms of universe breaking is just how jacked out the wazoo Rey is when it comes to the Force. With no training, never even thinking about using the Force before. She has a weird, spooky Force vision. All of a sudden, not only can she use mind control on a stormtrooper, she can fight Kylo Ren in hand-to-hand combat and beat him soundly. It doesn't make any sense in terms of the universe. And like, if they're going for like, ooh, she's this super powerful Force user, where is this going? One, I don't think it's really great to kind of just leave that in a movie, because if you're talking about a movie in its own right, you don't want to rely on later movies to like explain really big questions you have. Maybe if there's like a cliffhanger at the very end of the movie, but not in terms of like this thing that's being set up like for almost like a whole third of the movie.
There's some stuff, if we're going to talk about is Rey too Force powerful or not, there's some stuff that I think is very believable, especially from a like layman's perspective, which is like her ability to resist interrogation probably like isn't too out there, right? It's just like instinctually defending her mind. Or maybe even like just the ability to recall the lightsaber to her by just like yoinking on it. Like those seem like things that are just like very instinctual, guttural. Like it's not like something that looks like it requires a lot of technique. On the other hand, something like the ability to do the mind thing on the stormtrooper, that one seems like just like in my intuition seems like something that should require some amount of technique. And so like that's where the verisimilitude starts to break for me a little bit. As far as like, how could she beat Kylo Ren? I personally took that as this is a mystery that needs to be answered later. So for the purposes of this movie as like a contained by itself, it's not very satisfying. But in the context of it's a trilogy and not every single thing will be answered, I think it's like acceptable.
Yeah, and that's probably a good way to put it. I erred more, and maybe this is to the detriment of the movie, just because, you know, like I said, it set off things well, in my opinion, and some of those things, like what you just said, are questions that I go as an audience and say, okay, this is unclear. I don't love it as a fan, personally, but as a story element, I don't hate that she has this abounding well of power, and where does this come from? We don't know. We're going to get this hopefully answered in the next movies, right? And maybe it's because those are answered in ways that, especially if your name is Andrew and you've watched other movies and are a big fan, that it really annoys the crap out of you how they answer those questions. It reflects poorly on this movie and makes you go that this is just simply an unacceptable from the beginning.
I think in terms of like there's a couple of things going on here. First off, when it comes to like evaluating a movie, right? You have to ask yourself, how much do I allow other movies to influence my evaluation of this movie, right? And like even Sean calls back to this when he says like, well, we'll wait for another movie to see how this plays out. And I think there's a certain element of like, I'm not going to go and like critique like the plot of a movie or the way that characters function by pulling from every single bit of Star Wars knowledge that I have. But I think when it comes to evaluating a movie, you need to be evaluating it in the context of the universe that it's set in. And I talked to Maverick about this, and it's like, why make a Star Wars movie?
Mm-hmm.
If you're wanting to make a movie but not obey the laws of that universe, then just make a different movie with a different universe. And so, like, I'm almost like thinking of the idea of like a social contract. Like you're there for a reason, right? You're agreeing to the laws of that universe by making a movie set in that universe. And so I think that there's definitely some like weight to be held in terms of evaluating what are the established laws of this universe And so I think at the very least, look to the movies 4, 5, and 6 to what are the laws of like how these Jedi function. And so with the character of Luke, you have a character who is the son of Darth Vader. You have a character who is very obviously Force sensitive. He has been even like given a small amount of training by Obi-Wan. And in 5, he's been training with Yoda for weeks. And yet at the same, or maybe it's like a week, I don't remember the exact time frame, but he's been getting some form of training. And it's an intense form of training because Luke is very much not enjoying it. And Luke's on his own journey of like doubt in 5. And so he's had plenty of time to kind of stew and dwell on his Force abilities and kind of get accustomed to them. And in his fight with Darth Vader, he gets his rear end soundly handed back to him and gets his hand cut off. And this is Darth Vader. This is someone who is like in terms of what is set up for Luke, he's set up as being very powerful.
Yeah.
Rey is being set up as being very powerful as well. And yet at the same time, it's been established that like Darth Vader, and you also can call back to 1, 2, and 3 as well, because these are the movies that we're drawing from as the audience when we're watching 7, 8, and 9. And if you've never seen 1 through 6, okay, well, I guess you just came to see a movie because you came to see a movie. But at the same time, you need to ask yourself as the director, when you're making a movie, if you disobey the laws of a universe, sure, you might appeal to the people who've never seen 1 through 6, but everyone who has is not going to be happy with that movie, and you're not going to be making you're not going to have the same success you would beforehand. And so like, it's been established that Anakin's powerful. It's been established Luke's powerful. It's kind of believable that like you could set up Rey as being a powerful character, but without the training that she has, I don't see her ever beating Kylo Ren in combat.
I'm going to pop in just a slightly.
Sure, go ahead.
Do you think that the goal of the movie or this podcast is talking about whether it's a good plot or whether it makes the audience happy, right? Because I think that if a director is violating a pre-established law of the universe, like you feeling like this is deeply wrong, it's discordant, it doesn't make sense, right? That sense of wrongness can be like a deliberate weapon against you, which is you, the audience member, you feel something's wrong. And that's the whole point. There is something wrong. Why is she powerful? Why can she beat Kylo Ren, right? This is like, perhaps, Andrew, like we don't need to say that any instance of breaking a law of the universe is like necessarily wrong, because sometimes breaking things is okay, because if you feel bad about them being broken, it's for the right reason, which is you should feel bad and you want to know why.
Right. And here's the thing is like there has to be a difference here between when it comes to the rules of the universe, excessive strain versus a violation. In that I would argue that there are movies after this one that have clear violations of rules that they set up. And these are more hard and fast rules so that they say, this is how this functions fundamentally. And you can't do this, you can't do that, blah, blah, blah. And so in that case, when you break that rule, that's a problem. There's other kinds of situations, kind of like what we're discussing here, where it's a situation of excessive strain. Not that it can't occur, but there needs to be a very good justification for why it occurs. And this is even seen to a certain degree earlier in the series where you have Anakin Skywalker, where he's an anomaly in and of himself. And his ability to become such a powerful Jedi Master when he goes into training far beyond when he should be, shows a certain degree of excessive strain in a world that this should not occur, but he is so powerful and his birthright in some ways justifies how this existence occurs. And so the question is does Rey have a similar or even greater justification for having this excessive power? And this movie doesn't answer it. And as much as I hate it, I would even argue that the answer they give kind of justifies it. I don't know that the answer that they give necessarily is fully cohesive, to be clear, and that's a later movie. But the answer that they give, I think, justifies the power.
I think, okay, there's a couple things here. I think if we're evaluating the movie in terms of how the question is answered, you like harken back to Anakin being accepted in the Jedi Order. all of the problems one has when you're talking about in this element of the movie, I think you still at least have a justification for why the rules of the universe are broken in that movie. The justification is it's his birthright. He's the chosen one. And even with Anakin, you have a very similar thing that similar path that Luke goes through, where he is literally the chosen one. He has more force potential than Master Yoda himself, okay? And yet he still gets beaten by Count Dooku in combat in episode 2. Anakin still has problems and weaknesses that befall him in terms of, even after being trained in the ways of the Force is for over a decade, is still being beaten. Whereas Rey has never even, keep in mind, her problems with her duel with Kylo Ren are twofold. One, she's never used the Force before, other than to, like, part of the interrogation, and then all of a sudden she can mind control. But two, she's never even picked up the lightsaber before. She's touched it. She's never wielded it. Like a lightsaber, one, it's been established that, like, you need training to use this thing. Like, even Luke, when he kind of, like, picks it up, is, like, waving it around. And Obi-Wan's like, yeah, you need to learn how to use this thing. And so it's like, how does she beat someone who's been training, like, his entire life with a lightsaber and the Force when she's never even used, like, either until that day? And so, like, I think in terms of straining the rules, this is, like, borderline breaking them. Like, I think that's how much strain is going into this.
Yeah, I mean, I don't love the lightsaber battle. I'm not gonna lie. What I'm trying to do is provide an alternative explanation that at least in some ways justifies where we're at.
I'm also serving intentionally as the greatest critic that this movie might ever get on this podcast, because I know Maverick and Sean want to be contrarian with me. So
I'm not contrarian.
I'm going to take Maverick is, at least. Sean has his own opinions.
That's hilarious. We haven't even gotten to 8 yet.
True.
We'll get there. But yeah, I think in terms of the setting, just to go back to where we started, in terms of the setting, like, the hyperspeed thing is a minor thing. It's more like I wanted to point that out rather than to make a major complaint about it. And then the whole thing with Rey using the Force is probably my biggest complaint in terms of world building, as well as just, like, Rey's power level in general. I mean, in terms of, like, the movie itself, I think that might be my biggest complaint, actually.
I don't want to dwell too much on setting. I think we've kind of beat that dead horse down. So let's talk about the villain. Sean, what did you think? Did you think that the villain or the obstacle in the way of our protagonist is a compelling one?
Oh, I love the villain. One thing that I looked for as I took notes in this movie was, this is different than the last trilogy. And so it's not going to be a bunch of one-to-one recreations, though there are many similarities. And so, like, Kylo Ren, what is he versus what isn't he? It is very clear that Kylo Ren is someone who is constantly struggling with his image as working for the First Order. He's someone that can be menacing when he really, really wants to. At the same time, when he's trying to display his intimidation and power, he's someone that loses emotional control, right? If Darth Vader is pissed at an officer, he's just like, I'm going to choke you, and I'm going to, like, stand still and calmly do it as it happens. Whereas when Kylo Ren is frustrated, he whips out the lightsaber, and he starts throwing the tantrum by destroying stuff. He's driven by, like, this all-consuming rage and anger that he goes back and forth with. And then, like, he has to make a decision. And there's, like, really good lighting and composition that I could talk about when he goes and he kills his dad. But he decides, okay, the only path forward for me is to embrace the dark side. And he finally does. I also like the contrast between when he has no helmet versus when he has a helmet.
Okay, that's a hot take.
Well, because the image of Kylo Ren is when he's projecting. It's not his true self. He's trying to emulate Darth Vader. He's a shadow of Darth Vader. He's not Darth Vader. So that means when he puts on the helmet, sure, he got this intimidating voice, but as soon as he takes off the helmet, it's like he seems less intimidating than before. Well, because he's not truly embracing the role of the dark side for most of the movie.
Yeah, no. I generally agree. I actually think that that's a lot of good points. Andrew, do you hate Kylo Ren?
I think Kylo Ren as a villain, like a lot of what Sean's saying is true. I think in terms of like a compelling villain in the context of Seven, I do appreciate his character. Um, it is so difficult not to include what I know about 8 and 9, but I will admit Kylo Ren is set up well. I think there are some like minor things that I have problems with. I think if they're going for like the whole helmet on, helmet off, and like helmet on is when he's trying to emulate Vader, helmet off is when he's like his true self. I think they kind of blur the lines a little bit because there's some instances where it's like, oh, he like tries to like be less like Darth Vader and kind of like show his humanity to Rey when he's interrogating her by taking off his helmet. Um, but like there's already kind of elements of that earlier on where you can see him kind of breaking down as like this intimidating character. And so I think maybe more of like a creative decision in terms of the people making the movie would have been more intentional about when his helmet is on and off, I guess. And maybe they were, it just wasn't clear to me as the viewer, like what the defining line was, if you will. And maybe that was intentional too.
I get what you're saying, Sean, about the helmet and showing that contrast, and to a certain degree, I appreciate the goal. I don't think it translates super well, personally. I think that Kylo Ren as a character is incredibly intimidating with mask on, and that was part of the goal. And then when he takes it off, especially the first time when he's trying to talk to Rey and convince her to give him this information, it's not exactly clear why he listens to her and takes the mask off, even though just because she asks, even though she's the prisoner. Also, from an audience perspective, they build him up as this towering, terrible man, and that's part of the power of when Darth Vader removes his mask, is you see a scarred man underneath, right? And when Kylo Ren takes off the mask, you go, oh, lame. And that's pretty much how you move on with this character. It's like, oh, this is
Yeah.
not what I was expecting at all. It's a little boy. It's not a strong man. And I think that's what you're saying is a good thing. And I don't think that most people expect that to be the type of villain that we're facing here. I will say though that anything that he's lacking as a villain, because I still think, despite that small issue, overall, everything you said, Sean, is 100% correct, and that still makes him a great villain. I gave it full points on the villain aspect because of how great of a re-embodiment of the Darth Vader-esque type with a unique twist, right? He is that temper tantrum throwing man who does his own thing and continues to aspire to be the Dark Lord that his grandfather was, and whatnot. But he also is trained by a formidable, ominous force known as Snoke. And you don't know anything about Snoke in this movie. All you know is he's this towering figure that completely controls his subordinates. He's scarred, but he has a lot of massive power. And you don't know where this comes from. And this mysterious evil is a very potent force that's driving Snoke and the other First Order generals. And that, I think, combined with Kylo Ren, makes a strong entry back into the Star Wars universe for the villains.
I think the helmet thing is minor. I think maybe it would have been better if they removed it in 8, and like, or maybe the end of 9, something like that, rather than like towards the beginning of the third, of like the last third of the movie, if you will. Like we can sit back and read into it, but it's not like it wasn't going off what Maverick said. It just didn't feel very intentional, if you will.
And I will say it is important that he takes off the mask for the sake of what happens between Ben and Han Solo. I think that is.
I actually think it would have been much. I'm actually not sure how I feel about that, but like, there's some possibilities you can play around with. It's not super beneficial to think about what ifs, but like maybe what if he took it off when he sees his dad or something like that to add to the humanness of that scene.
I mean, he does.
Who knows? Well, yes, but that being the first time.
Okay. Anyways. Cool.
Anyways, we can move on. The villain, I don't have a major problem with the villains. I actually really like General Hux. He's a great Hitler villain. Okay.
Yeah, I don't love what they do with him later, but yes, he is a great in episode 7. Is there a theme in this story? I think we've kind of danced around it, so we don't have to spend too much time on it. But Sean, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, we see it in Finn and we see it in Rey, which is in order to confront evil, you need to be able to move on from the past. Finn is someone who's traumatized, and he has like this horrible past that he wants to run away from danger. But when danger comes, like, people got to be able to rise up to face it. And like, you get the motivational speech inside of the bar. Rey, she's got a pass. I need to go see my family. I've got severe abandonment issues, but sometimes danger comes to you and you got to soldier on and you got to fight anyway, even if you have all these hangups in the past. So for me, and then on the flip side, what's the villain? The villain's got hangups about his past, right? He's got a dad in Han Solo, but he's not confronting evil so much as he's supporting evil, but he's abandoning the past and soldiering on in order to make his goals happen.
No, and I put a similar thing. I put it more in the terms of belonging, like trying to find their place in the universe. And some of that definitely goes with ignoring or like coming to terms with the past and what that means for you. But yeah, you see that in Finn, you see that in Rey, and you see that to some degree in Kylo Ren as well, as he strives to confirm that this is where he belongs in the First Order as the descendant and inheritor of the birthright of Darth Vader. So, but yeah, basically the same thing. Andrew, you didn't think there was a theme, did you?
A theme? I think like the theme you guys are going for is there.
Bump your score up! Come on.
I'm not sure there's a very like in terms of themes. You're typically thinking of like some quick word answers, right?
Yeah, the theme is usually like something that you will see embodied in characters or an ideal of some sort. Usually in a good story, that theme gets developed and tested, and then at the end you have some sort of message that is conveyed through that theme being embodied in these characters in the story.
Yeah. I think in terms of a theme, like the best you're going to get is probably like belonging, I guess. I just don't see that as a very powerful theme, if that makes sense. Like, I get that there's a theme present. I don't think that in terms of what, I don't think that, like, one, I think most Star Wars movies have had multiple themes. Very powerful themes, too.
Sure, they can, yeah.
And we've discussed this in the past. And so I think in terms of 7, like, the theme is there. I just personally, as someone who's trying to evaluate a plot, do not find that theme to be compelling in terms of plot itself.
It's fine.
Like, I'm not going to argue with the fact that it's there.
Yeah, and I don't know that every theme is going to be compelling to each person individually, but I think acknowledging that it exists.
Multiple people here.
Right, and why 2 people disagree with one little butt. So, Heightened Tension. Let's talk about this for a second. I'm really.
This is just Maverick
ragging on you.
Pissed off about the John Wick. Okay, he's just biting me back for what I did to him during the John Wick podcast.
No, I actually liked what you did on the John Wick stuff. There's other people who did not, but that's not me.
Those people don't deserve a right to an opinion. Okay.
How about Heightened Tension? Does the movie consistently put the hero in a worse situation as the story progresses?
Yeah, we go from being pursued by some guy stealing a droid to being pursued by the First Sword off Jakku to a full-on armed assault at the bar to being tortured and then a massive battle at the end. So it just kind of goes.
True. Okay. You want to counterweight that, Andrew?
I'd say yes and no. I think they heighten the tensions because you have, like, especially in the beginning when Rey and Finn first meet, you go from like kind of mundane life to being pursued by the First Order, being on the Millennium Falcon, finding Han Solo, fighting these other like gangs, and then you end up on that whatever that planet's called. I don't even know, nor do I care. But like never shows up again.
Takodana.
But you kind of have a no. I'm talking about the cantina. planet.
Takodana
The
with
First Order.
Maz.
Yeah.
How do I know
You
this
kind
and
of
you
have
don't, Andrew?
because I
You're
don't
supposed
care
to be the
about
Star Wars.
7. My brain, as I have most of the storage has been filled, okay, and I have to be selective with what else I put up in there.
Oh, I see. So college isn't going to be
yeah.
that much more useful to you. I see.
Yeah, pretty much. Um, the way that I feel this the movie kind of counteracts itself is with Rey, because when you're thinking of heightened tensions, you're thinking of in terms of like the good guys and the bad guys, but you also need to think in terms of the main character, right? For Rey, the tensions kind of go down after she's captured by Kylo Ren. Like they have this weird mini climax with her interrogation where she's able to like turn the tables and then boom, all of a sudden she's able to read his mind, which again goes back to her having like way too much power in the Force. Like I get defending your mind, but entering his is a whole nother one. And then like her just escaping and being like on her own is kind of like, well, I guess Finn and Han Solo didn't really need to go and rescue her. And so like, yeah, the tensions overall kind of rise. But for the main character, there's kind of more an ebb and flow, if you will.
Right. And that goes back to what we were discussing earlier, which is the motivations of the protagonist in regards to this movie. And I would say two things on this. First is her motivations as a main character aren't clearly established even for herself, right? She doesn't really know what she wants other than she wants to find belonging. But what it even looks like, you have it clear that there's uncertainty there by the fact that she wants to go back home to Jakku because her family's there, but are they there? Okay, when I touch this lightsaber, I have this vision about the future, right? And as much as I defended that earlier in this podcast, I don't know that it provides clear motivation for her as a main character, which if she's the main person we're following, right? We care about the story because we care about what's going to happen to her. And when her motivations are confused, it's hard to anchor tension to that and cause you to care about what's going to happen moving forward in regards to that character. So that's first where I have some sort of issue. I will still agree that there's some significant plot points that have tension regardless, and that's especially between Han Solo and Ben Solo, or earlier on when they're being chased by the the First Order. Things like that still provide strong tension. The other thing that pulls away is that uncertainty is what drives heightened tension. You don't know what's going to occur. It's that uncertainty that causes you to wonder what will happen next. If you know what's going to happen next, you don't really care as much. And in this case, one of the downfalls of this movie is I believe it mirrors episode 4 closely enough that as an audience, we have a general idea of where this plot is going. And because of that, we're not really super concerned about what's going to happen to most of these characters. And that reduces the tension in our minds.
The tension gets a little killed too when we think Poe is dead, and then Poe just like
It's just yeah.
suddenly lives again. That was like, if we're asking, does the tension go up? Sure, but is there like any permanent consequences of the escalating tensions? Not really, right? Up until Han Solo dying, most everybody that we know and care about is okay, and anybody we think dies ends up coming back anyway.
No, when I rewatched that scene with Poe and he's explaining how he flew out of his cockpit or whatever, I was thinking of that Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure scene where he's like, I fell out of my suit when I hit the floor. Yeah, it was like one of those moments. Hold on, this doesn't make any sense at all. So yeah,
Are we
I
talking
would definitely, I'm
about
glad you pointed
like?
that out.
Are we talking about how Poe just like miraculously survived?
Yeah. Yeah. And
Oh
that
yeah,
we both
yeah.
agree that's dumb, Andrew. Don't worry.
Okay. Well, I know Sean thinks
Um
it's dumb because we talked about it during the movie.
did the protagonists or the main characters experience world shattering loss in this movie? Kind of danced around it a little bit.
Poe doesn't die, so Finn's world-shattering loss doesn't actually result in a loss.
Sean, you don't understand. His world-shattering loss is that he doesn't get to confess his undying love for Rey.
We'll talk about the love story in later movies, okay?
Yeah.
What love
man,
story?
that is gonna be a discussion. Oh my
That's
gosh.
The loss of Han Solo, you would think is supposed to be a big earth-shattering loss. It might be for the audience, but it's not really for Rey, because one thing I will agree with is if Han Solo is supposed to be a new father figure for Rey, because it's never made explicit that she sees him that way, and it's only really ever implied, when Han Solo jumps from person I admire to replacement father figure, it's never clear when that gap gets jumped over. So when he dies, I'm not really sure if Rey is just losing an idol that she worships, or if Rey is losing someone that she like looks up to as an authoritative paternal figure. So it's not like she's reflecting on the loss of Han Solo during the lightsaber fight. She's more about surviving herself. So like, I'm not sure it's really devastating for anybody but Chewie.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. I hadn't thought about that, because I do think that is one of the more powerful scenes in the movie. A huge experience of loss, but is it a huge loss for the protagonist? Is it? I don't know. I think you are right on that. That those are some really good points. And I may have been viewing this one too closely in terms of a nostalgic viewer who has grown up with Han Solo in all these previous movies, and so that is what tells me, oh, this must be significant because I know and care about Han Solo, so surely I should care about him in this movie. But you don't get that same investment in this movie specifically.
No, I pretty much agree with that. I do like. I will say most of the characters in this movie, I do appreciate like their arc. As much as I like Poe Dameron's character, I don't think he has a ton of development. He like dies and comes back. And then I do have some qualms with Finn, but I don't know if it's the best time to bring them up now.
Cool. Well, let's talk about revelations. Was there a big revelation in this movie, and does this movie have a surprise ending?
Do you want to go first, Sean?
No, you go first, Andrew. I want to hear what you have to say.
I think this movie is akin to episode 1, where they're like with Anakin and they're like, oh, he has no father. And it's supposed to be like this groundbreaking revelation. And they do it with Kylo Ren, where they're like, oh, Ben is our son. And it's like, they kind of like just throw that out there. And they're supposed to be like, oh, what? And it's just like, oh, I could definitely see that. Okay, cool. No one cares. Like, sure, it's like, it's a revelation. Like, we know, like, we are, this information is revealed. But in terms of like, and like, oh my gosh, I didn't see that coming, I don't think there was any sort of revelation there. It was more like, yes, information. Cool.
On my second rewatch, I mean, this is probably the problem with all revelations, which is when you know it's going to happen, it impacts life.
Right.
I remember seeing this movie years ago. I was surprised and shocked about the revelation of Kylo Ren's parents. It didn't hit that hard this time, but I don't know if that's just because I already knew it was going to happen, and I've been familiar with 8 and 9 and had years to stew on it. So upon second rewatch, there was a revelation. Did it change everything for me? Not as much.
Sure. And when maybe this should be written a little clearer in the review system. The revelation that quote unquote changes everything is, does it change the storyline in some substantive way, right? So wait, I was about to give an example that would spoil something. Sean, have you showed him Attack on Titan?
No, he hasn't.
Okay, then I'm not going to say that. Because for me, Attack on Titan is like the quintessential example of big revelation after big revelation that definitely changes everything in one way or another. They do that specific element of the storyline very well. But there's other examples. So have you seen Dune 2?
Yeah, I'd love
Okay,
to.
We both want to see it.
Dune 2 is a pretty solid movie. One of the things that's a problem with it, though, is it has a big revelation. That being that the the parental figure of Lady Jessica is Baron Vladimir Harkonnen. That doesn't actually fundamentally change anything about how the movie existed previously or how the movie continues to exist moving forward. And while it is a substantive revelation, it doesn't actually have any formative impact on the storyline itself. This one, I would argue, does, because fundamentally, it is Kylo Ren, who is this character who has been acting in a way to chase down Luke Skywalker. And the question is, why does he want Luke Skywalker so desperately in the same way that the Resistance wants Luke Skywalker? Luke Skywalker, if he's out of the picture, is actually easier for the First Order, right? Why does he care that he's gone in the middle of nowhere? But when you realize that he has a familial relationship to this character, you realize there's something deeper here. And there's a bigger reason why Kylo Ren wants to find this and also has a connection to Han Solo. And that plays out in its full manifestation in that dark moment we were just discussing, where he faces his father down, and rather than turning back to the light side like Darth Vader does, he ends up reversing that and going further into the dark side in an effort to reclaim his birthright. Right. So there's a sense in which that revelation, I actually would think, is a big revelation, not so much because, I mean, whether you saw it coming or not is to a certain degree whatever. I don't think it's the most hidden revelation. I also don't think it's the clearest revelation, but I do think it makes a substantive change to the storyline. Cool. Anything about the ending? You guys want to talk about that ending scene? Death Star 3.0, R2-D2.
I know Andrew's got problems with R2-D2 just sitting in the base the entire time, but the cinematography of like Rey landing on the planet and just like holding out the lightsaber, the camera spinning around the island, it does like it's very hard to describe the emotion that did, but it was definitely a satisfying one, right? Mm-hmm. A war-weary old Luke sitting there like with tired eyes staring at Rey as Rey, the hopeful next generation in the future, is hoping to learn from him. I really, really liked at least the final like minute or so. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Very end, it's fine. It's great. I love the ending. Hate what it does with it, but in terms of how 7 ends, it's good.
Oh, I was not expecting that.
I will admit that younger me watching that movie saw Mark Hamill with a beard and thought, "There's no way that's Mark Hamill," because I was like, "That looks nothing like Luke Skywalker." What happened? And now I can see the resemblance. This is an older version of him. I did not expect the beard. That's all that to say.
Sure.
I do appreciate the end, though. I think my problem with the end comes with the fact that R2-D2 had the map the entire time, and they literally are sitting there going, like they're in the base. BB-8 brings them back. They're like, "Oh, it's only a portion of it. It's too bad we don't have the rest of it." And then the end of the movie is just and then the end of the movie is just like R2-D2 wakes up. "Oh, guys, I have this map. You don't happen to have the rest of it, do you?"
Yeah.
And well, like, oh, yes, we do.
The other thing,
it's just very convenient.
It also asks broader questions. There's nothing particularly different about that scenario compared to the scenario earlier where BB-8 first shows the map. Like, why didn't he wake up then?
Exactly. Yeah.
The real question is if you have a map of the galaxy and you have like one gigantic jigsaw piece, why couldn't you just take a regular map and just like right?
That too.
Yeah. The other thing, I was just like, let me get this straight. You have no maps of the galaxy. You have no idea where this fits in the rest of the universe, because it's a pretty big chunk of the universe. It's not a small bit that he has. Like, we're missing the map.
If I took a picture of the eastern half of North America, it's not like I need a map with the eastern half of North America cut out to know where it is.
Yeah. Oh, darn. Where is this? I have no idea.
You know what? I'll play the devil's advocate on this one.
No.
This is going to be fun. The only thing I can conceive of as to why they would need the whole map is because of hyperspace routes. You have to have a specific route plotted to get to specific planets or locations. And so, like, it's plausible. And I'm going to be honest, I don't think that the people making this movie thought this hard about it. But, like, it's plausible you could say that they need the whole map to get the route. Like, there's whole, like, talks in the first 6 movies about how, like, we can't go to this portion of space, or we can't go through this portion of space because it's, like, controlled by the Hutts, or because we don't have this route.
Sure.
We don't know how to get there. And so, like, that's the only thing I can conceive of.
Sure, but then at the same time, you're talking about a map, not a route, which is like, if you're asking that, you're saying that you don't have access on your ships to routes to go different places in the universe because you don't have this one specific map. I don't think that necessarily makes sense in regards to how the machines are programmed and how the spaceships work.
But you also have to understand, like, the Star Wars universe hasn't been fully explored either. Like, there are planets no one knows exist, which is why Dagobah functions as a safe place for Yoda to hide out on.
No, I was just saying, like, that lends credence to BB-8 having that part of the galaxy and them not knowing where it is and stuff like that. Like, Kamino's been erased from databases before, things like that. It's not like we don't have precedents for universe planets not existing or not being known where they are. It just seems odd when you see this map of the galaxy and it's got, like, at least 10 planets in it that you wouldn't know where any of those are. And just be like, oh my goodness, I'm lost. I don't know where this planet is. Blah blah blah. I call BS.
I'm not disagreeing with you guys. I just decided to play the devil's advocate to be contrarian.
Okay, there we go. Is there any last points you wanted to address on that, Sean, or anything else about the movie in general?
No, I think everything's been said in this 90-minute podcast, roughly.
Nice.
Has been said. I'm super excited for episode 8. Okay, that one's gonna be fun to talk about.
That is true, and that'll be a good place to end it. So here we are.
Wait,
that's it.
On.
Okay, all right, Andrew, give your little point.
I had one final thing. Okay.
Okay.
I was waiting for a good moment to put this in there, and I it's more of, like, I'm not sure how I feel about this. I've thought it through. I'm interested to see what you guys think about this too. Finn's character, okay? He is created as this stormtrooper who goes bad, right? And they kind of make a one-liner where Kylo Ren's like, oh, if only you had clone troopers, like, they'd be more obedient to you. Like, I get what they're going for, right? But there's a couple of, like, problems or discrepancies in my own mind. One, Finn's character, how, like, he just out of the blue is like, I have decided that the First Order is evil. I don't think it's super plausible to say that a stormtrooper has no idea what the First Order does in terms of, like, killing innocents.
I see.
Two,
you,
Sean, you, hold on to it. Hold on to what you have to say. Two, if Finn is deciding that he wants to be good, right? They set it up as he's going to help the Resistance by helping Poe escape, right? But then, why doesn't he want to help the Resistance outside of that? Why help Poe at all? Why not just escape and not draw attention to himself by helping Poe escape at all? Like there's just... Go ahead, Sean.
There's explanations for both of these. Mm-hmm. It's actually in the dialogue of the movie. One, it's not that Finn is completely unaware of anything the First Order does. It's that Finn, up until now, has been a janitor. So he hasn't seen live combat until he gets put on this expedition, which means he's not shooting civilians. He's not getting blood smeared across his face as his comrades scream in pain, right? None of that occurs. So, like, Finn is essentially, like, getting his first dose of shell shock, PTSD. He's like the horror he has only heard of versus being confronted with. I think there's a fair bit of difference between hearing about the Ukraine war and fighting in the trenches and like stabbing like a Russian soldier with a bayonet, right? In the same time, why does he need Poe? What's this whole conflict about the resistance? Poe explicitly says, you need a pilot, don't you? And that's because while Finn wants to escape, he can't fly a ship himself to escape. He needs Poe to do the flying so that he can get away. And then once he gets away, he doesn't really need Poe anymore, which is why he immediately on Takadana says, now we can just run because I don't need a pilot anymore. I can go do my own thing.
See, I still have issues with that, though, because when Poe goes, you need a pilot, Finn's like, oh, I do need a pilot. Like, he hadn't thought that through, which means that his motivation for saving Poe was different than self-serving. And, like, when he asks him, why are you doing this? He gives an explanation. He says, because it's the right thing to do, which doesn't line up with his character for the rest of the movie when he's like, I just need to get away. I just need to get away. I can't die. If his motivation was, it's the right thing to do, he would have been sticking with the resistance because it's the right thing to do, which is, it goes back to the whole motivation shifting and changing with Rey, where it's like, they kind of give their characters motivations, but they give them just the convenient motivation at the time. They don't really commit to the bit, if you will, when it comes to giving their character a motivation and sticking with that motivation throughout the movie.
I will admit that the characters, some of these resistance characters, are given somewhat altruistic motives, at least in the lines that they're given as characters. But that doesn't always translate into how they act on the screen, right? And so I think I'd actually agree with that point as a whole, that his actions don't line up with the character that we see demonstrated on the screen. I still think that Sean's explanation is somewhat thorough. There is some gap in regards to character, in regards to those lines at the beginning especially, but I don't think that defeats Finn's character as a whole. I still think that his character, that creates a gap, but it's still fairly cohesive.
Yeah, I don't think it defeats his character. I think there are just inconsistencies within their characters as a whole.
And not to be fair, to be honest, Finn is one of the he's one of the characters that has consistently terrible lines in the movies.
Yes. But yeah, that was just my finishing thought. I think in terms of Poe as the only other like main character, if you will, he functions as more of an established character in 7. Like, he doesn't really have much development. He's just a resistance leader. He's a good pilot. He knows what he's doing.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't have anything to figure out.
Yeah.
So,
and I think that that's what we're going to see more of in the next movie, which we will review next time. See you all then.